Has it actually been a good year for the Big 12? That is a question that I will submit to you to start the show today. And could we wind up with an unbeaten team in a Power Four conference left out of the playoff, left out of their own conference championship game? Another issue to tackle tonight as we are now heading into November, which means we're heading into the time of year where tiebreakers are going to come around the corner and jump up on everybody. Nobody has been thinking enough about this, but we have some wild tiebreaker scenarios in the Big 12 and the ACC that could leave some teams totally SOL. So a lot to break down on the show tonight. Welcome in. For those who are uninitiated, here we talk about all things in college football from a non-Power 2 perspective. You are going to get a show here that originates from Big 12 country and is not going to be focused around the SEC or Big 10, but we'll cover everything happening in college football, including even, dare I say, some cheating allegations, allegedly. Not specifically allegations, because that was made clear in the article, but reading between the lines, it certainly seems like we have some borderline cheating allegations that have been levied across college football. So for everybody who could not get enough of Connor Stallions and how much that got talked about, we might have another sort of story right along the same lines here tonight. If you have been here before, you know how the show works. You can submit a super chat by clicking the $ below the chat box in order to be a part of the show. Otherwise, definitely keep comments coming in the chat throughout the night. But if you want to guarantee that you make it on the show tonight, you can do so by submitting a super chat. Click the $ below the chat box in order to do so. If you are not watching live and you are catching this after the fact, you can contribute on Venmo at John-Kurtz-4. And if you do that, that is another way to be a part of the show because I will read it to kick off the next show. So you can still be a part of the conversation even if you are not here watching this live. Big 12 fans, make sure to subscribe to my Big 12 newsletter if you want to cut the Power 2 crap, get rid of the Big 10 and SEC, and just get your news filtered to what matters to the Big 12. You can do so at ofbnews.com. That's ofbnews.com, or click the link in the description of this video. A couple of ways to do that. Appreciate all of you who subscribe. 2,600 plus of you who subscribe to Open for Business. Got a new one hitting your inbox tomorrow morning with Big 12 power rankings and more discussion about potential cheating. The Big 12, maybe? Question mark. And forget my voice tonight, by the way. Little bit hoarse. Been having like some allergy, cold issues. I don't know. Something along those lines. But do not have the voice going at full strength, which is really the moneymaker. So unfortunately, the moneymaker is a little bit out of it tonight. Okay. I believe that's all the housekeeping I have. So I talked to you on Sunday. Yes, it was on Sunday. On Sunday, I made the case. I think it's been actually a great year for the Big 12, which is surprising if you would have shown somebody the bottom of the Big 12 standings right now. If you would have shown that to somebody in July, they would have said, man, Utah and Oklahoma State that low, Kansas and Arizona struggling like that, 2 wins combined between them in the Big 12, 3 wins in the Big 12 between that entire group. This doesn't seem very good. Like the league is in some trouble. But actually, because of what BYU, Iowa State, K-State, and Colorado have done, I made the argument that the Big 12 is actually in a pretty good spot. But is that true? Has it been a good year for the Big 12? I saw that question kind of posed. I got a bit of pushback. So perhaps we should reconsider. And that's how we're going to open the show today. Let me share my screen with you and give you a view here of what my guy Pistol Rick had to say. Pistol Rick is a good follow. I enjoy his content. Love you, Pistol Rick, even if I am going to disagree with you a bit here. He says the Big 12 picked a bad year to be bad, in my opinion. Big 12 picked a bad year to be bad. Now, let me first say the point that he's making about bad year to be bad is that the Big 12 picked a year where college football is pretty wide open. And, I've made the comparison a couple of times on here to 2007. You've got crazy stuff happening like Vandy beating Bama. Vandy and Indiana are actually good teams. That definitely resembles what we saw in the top 10 over the course of 2007. Lots of upsets. Doesn't look like there are a bunch of really dominant teams. Like even Oregon has shown at times this year to be very, very vulnerable. Damn near lost to Idaho earlier this year. So because of all of that, because the SEC has a lot of really flawed teams, Bama, Tennessee, LSU, slightly below expectations. I would say right now for sure, Georgia and Texas have both lost games. Ohio State looks pretty vulnerable. It feels like a really wide open year. And it's a year where potentially there could be a bunch of playoff spots open. And if there is no truly dominant team, you'd have a better chance at actually making noise deeper into the playoff than perhaps you normally would be, or perhaps a Big 12 team would be expected to go. So from that standpoint, what Rick is saying makes all the sense in the world. All the sense in the world. This is a year where you would like to have a great dominant team. But that's a part of the issue, right? Now, Rick, I love you. I love you. But that statement felt a little bit to me like my team, who was expected to be good, is not good. So this must not be a good year for the Big 12. And I know Rick got pushed on that and clarified it. I will get to that comment in a moment. But it's not just him that would do that. I think even on a national level, there would be some people that would look at this and say, well, hey, I expected Utah to be really good. That's a team that I trust. There's a trust factor with the brand of Utah because everybody knows Kyle Whittingham is great. They went to the back-to-back Rose Bowls. Those are still doing a lot of heavy lifting for that program. There is a trust there. If it were Utah that was unbeaten right now, there would be more of a trust level than what we have in BYU. If Oklahoma State were unbeaten right now, there would be more of a trust level than there is with Iowa State. Probably not as big of a gap as the previous two that I mentioned, but still a gap there. And so I took that to be like, hey, people would look at it and say, well, Oklahoma State and Utah suck. How good could the league actually be? But my overall counter to this would be, man, when the games actually kick off on Saturday, we're going to be in November, okay? The calendar will have turned to November by the time the games kick off, November 2nd. And on November 2nd, when we tee it up in Big 12 country, you're going to have 4 Big 12 teams with a legit shot at making the college football playoff. And you have literally half the league still technically receiving odds to win the Big 12, which would mean that you have a handful of other teams that are like still involved. And theoretically, I guess if you wanted to really, really expand it, you could say those teams all have a shot at the playoff too. But you have 4 teams that have a realistic shot at it because of where they sit in the conference title race and or their chance for an at-large bid in one of these years where it looks like it's going to be pretty wide open. You also have a Heisman favorite. You've got a Heisman favorite and 4 teams that are still alive for the playoff right now in November. Right? I mean, Travis Hunter, I've been looking this week. It depends on where you look. I believe FanDuel, not a sponsor, could be, is one of the outlets that has Travis Hunter as the literal favorite to win the Heisman right now. It's a lot of good publicity for the league. And it means that a lot of eyeballs are going to have to be tuned into the league, and a lot of people are going to have to talk about the league. Whereas if you had one loss team and a bunch of 2 loss teams right now, and like that would not be good. You would have less conversation up at the top of the sport about what's going on in your league. And that would have played more true to the form of what I think people really expected out of this league, which, hey, zany, wild conference, anybody can beat anybody, but there's not any good teams. The only thing that really matters from a national standpoint, when you're talking about the league, did the league have a good year? Did they accomplish something on a national scale and with the credibility of the conference? The only thing that matters is getting teams into the playoff and winning playoff games. That is the reality here. And we thought that the chance to do that was going to be Oklahoma State, Utah, Kansas, or Arizona, and K-State. Instead, it's turned out to be Iowa State, BYU, Colorado, and K-State. You still have basically this same amount of teams that most people expected to kind of be in this conversation right now. They just have different names. They just have different names. And Rick did get pushed. I'm not trying to just sell out Rick here, okay? So don't flood his Twitter account with people being angry at him. But he did go on to say, not saying everyone is bad. I think we have 3 good teams. Just feels like an abnormal amount of mid to bad teams this year. So his point there that he is trying to make is like, it just feels like there's a lot of kind of blah in the Big 12, like teams that are okay at best. And I would agree with him on that. Does it feel like there are an abnormal amount of teams like that? Yes. But some of that is just math. In fact, most of that is just math, because let us not forget, this is the first year that the Big 12 has had 16 teams. Okay, as ridiculous as it is, 12 is in the name, but yeah, we have 16 teams. Only 2 years ago, this was a 10-team conference. Like there was a pretty rapid ascent here in the size of the league. So when you have something like that happen, you add that many more teams, you have much more of a chance to add teams that are going to be mid to bad. Look at the Big Ten. I mean, the Big Ten was already there before their most recent expansion, and now they have 2 more teams, and it still is just a league with a lot of mid to bad teams, because there is just so much more opportunity there for that to happen when you throw in teams of that caliber. So you throw in 8 teams new to the league, 4 of which, 8 new teams to the league in the last 2 years, 4 of whom were not actually in power conferences before. That is quite the opportunity for a lot of teams to come in and start clogging things up, where you feel like, all right, a lot of this league is mid to bad. The league got 60% bigger. So yes, you are going to, by just association of bringing those teams in, have more mid to bad teams in the league. That's point 1. Point 2, like I said, I would agree. I mean, that's why you get games like Houston beating Utah. You get the Baylor 50-plus game at Texas Tech, just when you start to think Texas Tech is a team that actually has some real substance to it. The Texas Tech TCU game, just wild swings. You get games like that, TCU Houston, right? I hate to involve Houston in all of this, but TCU Houston, you get games like that because there are a lot of mid to bad teams in the league that on any given day, any given Saturday, any given Friday, whatever days we're playing on now, anything really there could happen and has. But finally, point number 3 on this is, regardless of, yes, I would agree with the statement, and it is because you've just merely added so many more teams lately, I would come back again with it. It doesn't really matter, because what matters is what's at the top, and that's in good shape. Like, look at the Big Ten. It drives me insane to no end. I'm sure it drives a lot of you insane to no end, whether you're a Big 12 fan, ACC fan, G5, whoever. The Big Ten is just incredibly top heavy. It's incredibly top heavy. It's been Ohio State, Michigan, maybe kind of Penn State, maybe kind of Wisconsin, if we're going to extend this back the last decade. And that's about it. And then a bunch of blah, speaking of mid to bad, I mean, the Big Ten West, like, what has that been every year for the last 15 years? Mid to bad. So the Big Ten's been fine, though. If you haven't noticed, they are still in this Power 2 thing. They have the powers. They're top heavy. It doesn't matter. What you need is strength at the top in terms of national respect. You need strength at the top. You need teams that are going to compete for a championship every single year and that are big brands on TV. Like, that's what you need. Now, we know the Big 12 doesn't have the big brands that are on TV all the time, no matter what. Colorado is one right now for extenuating circumstances because of who their head coach is. You don't have those brands. So the only thing you can do is just get teams that are going to be in the national conversation at the top, be unbeaten, be close to it, get into the playoff, have a shot to win games in the playoff. That's what really matters there. So I don't even think, even if your opinion is, hey, this league's got a lot of crappy teams in it, doesn't really matter because of the 4 at the top right now. And the more they start to separate, it's actually a good thing. It kind of works against what the perceived narrative against the Big 12 was supposed to be this year, but I think it is actually a good thing. So I want to share another response that I got to this from my guy, Dan Lucero, who does an excellent job working at WIBW in Topeka. But Dan said this, counterpoint, I'll show you what it's in response to. I said the league will make it to November with 2 unbeatens and 4 with legit playoff hopes. Pretty good year. Dan said, counterpoint, there's only one Big 12 game that matters the rest of the season at this rate, and it's K-State, Iowa State in the final week. The league is going to be out of sight, out of mind nationally for a solid month. No other matchups have any juice. Now, I appreciate that type of pushback a lot because it's something I had not really thought of yet. And I do think that there's a very legitimate point in here, which is that TV ratings may not be very high over the next month for the Big 12. And that could have a real effect on how much the league is actually being talked about. Like, would it be in an ideal world from a rating standpoint, and how much are people going to, how much will the Josh Pates, the Solid Verbals, like college football final, how much will all these shows be showing Big 12 highlights or talking about Big 12 games? In an ideal world, to achieve that, you would have BYU and Colorado playing. You would have Iowa State and Colorado playing to go along with the Iowa State K-State game. You would definitely want that to happen. And that is not going to happen. You've got to wait all the way until November 30th, even for the K-State Iowa State game at the end of the year. But I don't think it's really that negative of a thing for a couple of reasons. Because, one, it gives you a better chance of those teams continuing to win. And what has been my whole premise throughout all of this, you just need teams that are going to be unbeaten or close to it that get into the playoff and have a chance to win games. And you need to get multiple teams into that playoff. And there is, by the way, I've been listening to all those shows that I just mentioned this week. There is conversation about that. Big 12 possible to get multiple teams in. There is conversation about that. Better chance of that happening, frankly, if these teams don't play each other right now. If they stay away from each other. Creates weird tiebreaker scenarios, may wind up screwing somebody. But for the league as a whole, it's going to be better if they're not actually going to have to play each other because of all of that. So it gives you a better shot at multiple playoff teams, I think, at the expense perhaps of some TV ratings and exposure. But even then, if the teams still stay unbeaten, people do have to kind of tune in to see what's going to happen there. Like, you'll have to keep an eye on Iowa State, Texas Tech this weekend to see if Texas Tech is going to put a scare into Iowa State. Iowa State took the field at home last time out 2 weeks ago and damn near got beat by UCF. We had the game 2022 TCU. This was about the time 2 years ago that started to turn into a real story. And people were like, oh man, like TCU really could do this thing. They went to Austin and won. And that was really when things turned like, all right, man, they could do this. And then they had a game in late November at Baylor, who was a 7-5 team that year, basically a 500 type team that year. And they almost got beat. And a lot of people watched, and it created this fantastic finish. It sort of actually added to the lore of TCU that season. So you're still very much in play to have moments like that, like BYU, Oklahoma State, right? The end of that game. Iowa State, UCF, the end of that game. And that could still draw some viewership. So I just don't think it's the end of the world from a pure viewership standpoint, and then what that even means to the league. Because if the teams keep winning, there will continue to be debate. All right? There will continue to be debate. BYU keeps winning, it'll be like, man, what if they lose in the Big 12 championship game? Should 9-3 Florida or 9-3 LSU, should that team get in over 11-1 BYU? That conversation will still happen. So I think right now, because of what's going on up top, I would still stand by the statement. It's been a very good year for the Big 12 to this point. I understand in saying that I very easily could get pushback, and I will just say, if you want to come after me with, playing this clip in 2 weeks and both Iowa State, Colorado, K-State, everybody's lost and now that luster's totally gone, that's fine, because I'm sitting here telling you right now, make sure and clip this too. It could absolutely fall apart. It could fall apart on Saturday. K-State's at Houston. Iowa State plays Texas Tech. BYU, I think, is going to be fine, though I'm sure you would find somebody out there at a sports book who would make BYU an underdog to buy this weekend. But assuming that doesn't happen, I think BYU will probably be okay. But you could start to see teams losing and this all crumbles. But for now, the problem is right now, based on what we know, I would stand by the statement that it has been a good year for the Big 12. So if you want to be a part of the show, click the $ below the chat box to do that. If you do that and submit your question or comment that way, it guarantees it will get read on the show. So appreciate all of you who do that. If you're a Big 12 fan, make sure you subscribe to my Big 12 newsletter, open for business. It's ofbnews.com, ofbnews.com to subscribe. Join 2,600 plus other Big 12 fans who do subscribe and get Big 12 news straight to your inbox multiple times a week for free. No SEC or Big 10 bias, just how the news in college sports affects the Big 12 conference. Like the video as well. That's a totally free way to support the channel as well. I'm going to respond to one thing here. You guys know this hits a little close to home because not only this week do we have Luna out here giving K-State some crap for, I assume that this was in reference to the Kansas game when K-State was a 10-point favorite and did not cover at home. I'm sorry if your bet didn't hit, Luna. But there was an AP voter who took K-State completely off the ballot. Look, say what you will. Kansas still has a lot of talent. That's a game that they wanted desperately, badly, and gave by far their best effort of the season. I'm not saying it was a great performance from K-State, but they survived. I would also ask, Luna, would you call Notre Dame trash right now? That's where you give your answer, because Notre Dame lost at home to Northern Illinois. Notre Dame lost that game. Would you call Alabama trash because they lost to Vanderbilt? You see, we can play this game. My point earlier is college football, it's not like a great year for elite teams. I could nitpick the resumes of a lot of teams here who have had situations very similar to what K-State has had there because there just aren't a bunch of dominant teams out there doing it right now. So I'm asking you to apply that across the board if you are going to hit Big 12 teams with it. Make sure you bring that same energy for especially Notre Dame, because they're the ones, everybody this week, the narrative with them is completely flipped. And it's, man, Notre Dame is fine. Notre Dame's good. They're getting in. They have atoned for the Northern Illinois loss. But say that out loud. That is a Northern Illinois loss. Okay? So let's just be careful. Let's just be careful with that. It is college football. You have to win your clunkers. You have to survive. And there is definitely a double standard out there for Big 10 and SEC schools as opposed to Big 12 ACC schools not named Clemson, Florida State, Miami, right? We see it a lot. John gives a good example too. Yeah, Georgia beat Kentucky by 1 point. And, if Mark Stoops had the courage to do the right thing and would actually have gone for it instead of punting, who knows what would have happened in that game. So another thing that's being talked about a lot this week, Big 12 and ACC tiebreaker scenarios are wild. And tiebreaker scenarios in general are really wild with these big conferences, these bloated conferences that we have. And it is possible. Again, November 2nd will kick off, and it is legitimately possible. You could have a Power 4 team go unbeaten in a Power 4 conference and not make their conference title game and get left out of the playoff. That is on the table, 100% on the table. If you thought last year was bad that Florida State could go through a Power 4 conference, go unbeaten, win the conference championship game, and not make the playoff, just wait until you see the sequel, right? The sequel is always worse. Just wait until you see the sequel, which is that we could have a team, in this case out of the ACC, go unbeaten in a Power 4 conference, not make the conference title game, and not make the college football playoff. They would not get a chance to earn the automatic bid to the college football playoff. This is the world of 16-team conferences, man. This is just what happens when you have conferences this big. And you can't have, I was going through, I'll get to it in just a moment, all the Big 12 tiebreaker scenarios. And when you have 3 teams together and they only have 2 common opponents, the entire schedule, I mean, it just underscores how much variance there is in who plays who. And some years that's just going to screw you. If you were doing divisions, like I know there's still a crowd out there that wishes were happening, that would definitely fix some of this from just like a competitive advantage sort of standpoint. But also, I mean, it's all about TV and dollars. So you want to maximize the best conference championship game you can have. And you need to ensure that that is the best two teams. So first, let's get to Big 12 scenarios, because I got so many questions this week about what happens if BYU, Iowa State, K-State are tied, or Colorado, Iowa State, K-State, or whatever the scenario is. I got a lot of questions about that. So I did digging, and here's what we've got. So the most common scenario I really see people asking about, because it seems pretty plausible, is that you have a three-way tie between BYU, Iowa State, and K-State. And really, the way that that would happen is that BYU loses somewhere. It doesn't really matter where. Cynical Cougar fans, I'm sure, would think that it would occur in the Holy War next week. But BYU drops a game somewhere, and then K-State wins out and beats Iowa State in Farmageddon on November 30th. So if that happens, then you'd have three teams that are 11-1. You'd have 11-1 BYU. Let's just, for conversation's sake, give them a Utah loss. They're 11-1. Iowa State is 11-1. Their only loss is to K-State. K-State is 11-1. Their only loss is to BYU. So how does that work from a tiebreaker standpoint? The first tiebreak that you would go to in the Big 12 would be, hey, has one team played the other two and beaten the other two? And if they have, then they advance on. Think last year's Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, K-State scenario. We do not have that. So then it goes to the record of the three tied teams will be compared based on winning percentage against common conference opponents. Okay, so as I mentioned, common conference opponents there turn into just Kansas and Houston. There are only two common conference opponents between all three of those teams. And in this scenario, everybody would be 2-0 against Kansas and Houston. I see Troy says, I thought BYU beat K-State. They did. They did not beat Iowa State. The only way that part of the tiebreaker works is if one team has beaten the other two teams. BYU has not beaten Iowa State. K-State didn't beat BYU. Iowa State didn't beat either of them. So you have nothing there. It would have to be one team that beat the other two. You don't. So you're on to common opponents. They're Kansas and Houston. Both teams would be 2-0. Then the next tiebreaker, this is kind of a long, rambling paragraph, but what it winds up saying is you would use the team's winning percentage against the collective tied teams, the highest conference finisher that they have all faced. So you would take that list, as I understand it, of the common conference opponents, and you would take the highest finishing team. So take your pick, Kansas or Houston, whoever it is. And what's the record there? Well, everybody's 2-0 against both of us. So we're still in the same spot. You don't break it with that tie. So then you come down to the tiebreaker that would finally basically break it. And that would be the record of the teams against their Big 12 schedule. My apologies. The language on this is just so crazy. So it would be the record of the Big 12 schedule that each team has played, your opponent's winning percentage of your conference schedule. And so I went through and tallied that. So if we had that scenario, the three teams at 11-1, K-State, Iowa State, BYU, stay with me here. What is the winning percentage of the Big 12 teams that they have played? And right now, there is a clear-cut distinction. K-State has a 53% opponent winning percentage there, 24-21. Iowa State has a 44% opponent winning percentage, which is 20-25. BYU has a 32% opponent winning percentage, which is 14-30. So BYU has a problem there. One of the main messages that you need to take away from this is that BYU does not want to be involved in one of these ties to try to make it to Arlington, because more or less their conference schedule has not been as strong, and the winning percentage of their conference opponents is not as strong. K-State has the advantage there. Iowa State in the middle, BYU after that. So what about Colorado? Okay, so what about Colorado? Colorado coming in here. If we wind up in a situation where K-State, Iowa State, BYU, Colorado are all 8-1 in the Big 12, which very easily could happen because you just take the same scenario I just laid out, and then you throw in Colorado wins all the rest of their games. Well, now you've got a 4-way tie. So who's getting in a 4-way tie? We go through the same exercise. We're basically in the same spot because in that case, there's only one common opponent between the 4, and that's Kansas. And everybody would have beaten Kansas here. So then we're back to conference winning percentage, opponent winning percentage. K-State 53%, Iowa State 44%, Colorado 35%, BYU 32%. Colorado is just in front of BYU, but still pretty significantly far off of Iowa State and K-State. This could all change. We'll see. This could all change, but for right now, it would appear K-State and Iowa State are going to be the winners in that scenario, that they would go play in the Big 12 championship game just a week after they played in Ames. So your conclusions right now on where things stand in the tiebreakers there are that, one, BYU is not going to be in great shape in any sort of tiebreaker they wind up in there because of the conference opponent winning percentage. Colorado, 2, will also have a tough time. And 3, a Farmageddon rematch could absolutely happen. Like the scenario I just laid out seems relatively plausible. Now, if I were predicting right now, I'd probably predict K-State to lose in Ames. And then we'd start to, if it's Colorado, BYU tied, you already saw the percentages there on who would go. Then we get into a little bit different sort of scenario with the tiebreakers. We could get into a million different ones here. But your 3 takeaways are Farmageddon rematch could definitely happen. BYU is going to have a tough time in multi-team tiebreakers. Colorado would have a tough time in multi-team tiebreakers. I hope everybody hung with me throughout all that. And we haven't even gotten to the ACC scenario, which is worse. It is worse. It is absolutely worse. Going to take time to address this real quick just to clear up questions for everybody. BYU did not lose to Iowa State. However, BYU did not beat Iowa State. To not get to that tiebreaker that I just broke down, one team, again, people follow me, one team would have to have beaten the other 2. No team would have beaten both of the other 2 in that scenario. That's why we get all the way down to tiebreakers. But let's look at the ACC, man. The ACC still has 4 teams that don't have a conference loss. So as much as I'm sitting here saying, hey, great for the Big 12 that you've got 2 teams that don't, the ACC has 4 teams that do not have a conference loss. 2 of them are SMU and Pitt. They'll play Saturday, so they're going to get down to 3. SMU and Pitt will play. Somebody will lose, and somebody will have a conference loss. If Pitt wins, then they would host Clemson on November 16th, which would mean that they could only have 2 maximum unbeatens by season's end. So that would actually be, from a headache standpoint for the league, that would be the better thing, that Pitt wins. Then they host Clemson. Somebody's got to lose, and you would wind up at the end of it with only 2 unbeatens that could meet in the title game. But if SMU beats Pitt, we could be in tiebreaker hell in the ACC, and real tiebreaker hell, because then none of the rest would play each other the rest of the way. Miami doesn't play a ranked team the rest of the way. Their schedule's pretty cushy. SMU would not play a ranked team the rest of the way. Clemson's only ranked opponent would be Pitt. So if you then wound up with a 3-team tie with Miami, SMU, and Clemson, guess what? We break out the ACC tiebreaker rules and you wind up in the same spot. If you wind up in the same spot, you're going by winning percentage again. So this is the Athletic I'm reading from. They went through the same exercise that I just walked through with the Big 12. Miami opponents have a 54%, if I'm going to round up, 54% win percentage. SMU opponents, a 52% win percentage. Clemson opponents, a 51% win percentage. Those could change a lot because those are very close. The records are 35-30, 33-30, 32-31. So those are very, very similar. And so what ends up happening is you could, one, depending on how it shakes out, have Miami as a Power 4 unbeaten that started the year ranked in the top 15, not even make their conference title game because of this tiebreaker and the unbalanced schedules and these big bloated leagues. That could absolutely happen. Now, for Miami, you could argue that would actually be the best case scenario. You don't have to go waste energy in an ACC championship game, risk guys getting hurt, and they would absolutely be in the playoff. The downside, I guess, being you wouldn't get a bye. So that could certainly be debated. But Miami could do that. Go run the table, go unbeaten. They wouldn't even be in the ACC title game. It could just be SMU Clemson. But if it's SMU here that is the odd man out, I mean, think about that. They do have a loss. It's just not a conference loss. And BYU fans know damn well what that loss is. It's 17-15 to BYU earlier this year. Or was it 18-15? 18-15? They lost to BYU earlier this year. So in that case, SMU may not get a bid. It would be very interesting to see if they did. If they were 11-1 with a loss to BYU at home at the beginning of the year, but they don't get into the conference championship game because of their opponent winning percentage in conference play being maybe just like a game or two worse than Miami and Clemson, and they're not actually in that game. What do you do with SMU? I mean, I do think that there would be a chance that they would get totally left out, which is wild. That is wild that we're in a world where that could actually happen. But that could, and that's a part of the point of this segment and to bring it up here, because I don't know that people fully wrapped their head around this as being a legitimate possibility. You know, BYU could spend 85% of the season unbeaten, drop one game, not even get a chance to play in the Big 12 championship game and get left out. SMU could lose one game in September, run the table in a Power 4 conference, not get the chance to complete a conference title season and get the automatic berth, and then just be left out in the cold, left out of the playoff. It's wild. It is wild that that is possible, but that is the new world of college football. So let me see if we have more questions about that, because I thought I saw somebody. Okay. So here, I see this. Rise and shout. In the event of a tie between more than two teams, the following procedures will be used. After one team has an advantage and is seeded, all the remaining teams, the multi-team. But that would be if one team, what that means, Rise and shout, is if one team has beaten the other two. So, okay, let's use the example. Iowa State, K-State, BYU. What that would mean is if BYU had beaten Iowa State and K-State, then take them out. They're seeded. They get one. Then you got to break the tie between Iowa State and K-State. That's how that would go. It's not, hey, BYU beat K-State, so they are exempt from this, because that's not fair to Iowa State. You didn't play Iowa State. That's not fair to Iowa State there in that tiebreaker. So I don't mean to be like the bearer of bad news here. Unfortunately, it kind of is for BYU fans right now. But now, and I guess I'll say this too, I and a couple others I know have reached out to the conference on this. I have not heard anything yet specifically on whether or not this is confirmed through the conference. We're just going off what the bylaws are that are put up on the website and got released earlier. But no, what that means is if somebody has beaten the other two, they're removed from the three-way tie, and then you just go repeat the steps to break the two-way tie between the other teams. Right? So did they play head-to-head? No. Okay, then you move down to the next one, the next one, the next one. It's not, hey, BYU had to win there, because how do you do that? Because then you say BYU beat K-State. Well, K-State beat Iowa State. So that's why we get into all these tiebreakers. So there's the explanation on that. Oh, come on, man. The Optimist, I'm sorry, you're gone. You're gone. We're not doing that. Come on, man. Okay. I'm going to hang on for a little bit to get the last major story of today. My voice is barely hanging on here, guys, but I'm going to hang on with you for the last little bit here. If you have something that you want to get on the show, click the $ below the chat box in order to do that. That is how you can get your question or comment on for sure. You can also contribute on Venmo, John-Kurtz-4, if you're not watching live and you want to be a part of the conversation. If you do that, I will lead off the show next time with your question or comment. So you can definitely do that too. Make sure you subscribe to my Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. If you're a Big 12 fan, you want Big 12 and SEC, or Big 12 news without SEC or Big 10 bias. and just filter down to why it matters to the conference you care about, ofbnews.com to get subscribed to that. 2,600 plus Big 12 fans have subscribed already. Friends, I've already seen some chatter about this in the chat tonight. Do we have Big 12 cheating on our hands? Allegedly. Do we have Big 12 cheating on our hands? Well, looks like we might, or at least the insinuation from one school seems to be that we might. Again, allegedly. And the schools in question are all old rivals, which, adds another layer to this story, which is seemingly what we get in college football these days when we talk about cheating allegations, because we just went through Connor Stallions, which of course was Michigan and Ohio State. So we have a story first that comes out in The Athletic. And I will say, actually, I got to give a shout out to, well, maybe I shouldn't shout him out specifically. A person that I work very closely with actually had this story before I even saw it get out to The Athletic or ESPN. With the specific teams all involved. And if we really want to give credit, message board geniuses actually had this story before anybody else earlier today. But a story comes out on The Athletic that was much more general than what we got from Max Olson at ESPN. Story from The Athletic was like, hey, there's problems with the Big 12 helmet communications. First year that we've had this, where a coach can talk through the helmet to his quarterback, and then on defense you get one player, the green dot helmet, and you can talk to them, plays, alignments, whatever it is that you want. There were issues with the fact that these were not encrypted, and so apparently they were possibly, like, you could basically get on the same frequency and hear what was being said from coach to player. So that turned into a concern. That was the basic story. I believe that did list the Texas A&M Arkansas game is when a lot of people figured it out. It did have that little nugget, which was included later in Max's story, but with a little bit of extra info. Then we get Max Olson's story on ESPN. And he says, coach to player in-game communications during Power 4 college football games this season have been occurring on unencrypted frequencies, sources told ESPN. A revelation that raises questions about whether they could have been compromised. So nobody knows for sure if it's been compromised, but they have raised questions. But this now gets into the specifics of the teams. All right. So Texas Tech athletic director Kirby Hocutt said he raised the issue during a call with Big 12 athletic directors Tuesday after learning the Red Raiders helmet communications were unencrypted and accessible to anyone with a scanner and knowledge of how to locate the frequencies. Whoo boy. All right. So the Big 12 has instructed its 10 schools playing games this weekend to send their helmet communication devices back to GSC, the provider for all Power 4 teams this year, for a software update that will give them encryption. First of all, GSC, come on, man. How are we? I don't really know what I'm talking about here. I'm way out over my skis. I am by no means an IT guy, but it seems like that is something that should be encrypted. That seems like something that should have been a pretty basic part of this that should have happened. Like, how did we not do that? With how paranoid college coaches are, with the fact that this was happening literally the year after all the Connor Stallions stuff, we decided to just let unencrypted helmet communications go out there. I mean, okay. Anyway, they're expected to be exchanged and back to the teams in time for all the games this weekend. But Texas Tech, here's where it gets juicier. Texas Tech has requested a report from the Big 12 on its recent games against TCU and Baylor to ensure the integrity of the games were not compromised. And the conference is accommodating that request. So Texas Tech requested that the Big 12 look into games against TCU and Baylor to ensure the integrity of the games were not compromised. Now, if you think this is them making a specific accusation, what's interesting is, like, I'm reading that right at face value. Texas Tech asked the Big 12 to look into their games against TCU and Baylor to make sure the integrity of the games were not compromised. 2 games that Texas Tech lost, by the way. And then 2 paragraphs later in the story, it says no schools have made specific allegations that an opponent may have accessed their in-game frequencies. and several coaches have questioned whether a competitive advantage could be gained if that did occur. Now, the back part of that, that's fine. We can have a discussion of whether or not there's actually competitive advantage there. But does it not seem like a little bit of cognitive dissonance that we're saying Texas Tech requested, like, hey, Big 12, we want you to look into our games against TCU and Baylor to make sure that the integrity of the games weren't compromised. But then in the story, we're clarifying no schools have made specific allegations that an opponent may have accessed their in-game frequencies. That's even the word may is pretty important there. It's doing a lot of lifting, because I would say that asking the Big 12 to look into those games to make sure the integrity of the games were not compromised would qualify as making an allegation that an opponent may have accessed in-game frequencies. That's not saying, hey, we know they did it. That's saying, look into this in case it happened, which to me would be another way to say that. Hey, that may have happened, so double check it. Like, that seems crazy. I'm sure it's doing some work for Texas Tech on that end, I would imagine. Like, that's just covering their tracks a little bit here. But I mean, in essence, that's what you have happening, right? I mean, Kirby Hocutt gave Max Olson a quote. It says, quote, "We've got to have a game whose integrity is not questionable in any way on a Saturday afternoon. We owe it to the 120 young men on our football team to ensure that happens, that it's a game of fair competition and the same set of rules are enforced." Okay. So Texas Tech is trying to look into, they want to make sure that Baylor and TCU were not cheating, according to this story. Reportedly, allegedly, whatever it is that you want to say there. Now we get a little bit more on the story about the Texas A&M Arkansas game, where Olson says a frequency coordinator made the discovery in late September while setting up for the Texas A&M Arkansas game at AT&T Stadium. The coordinator notified the SEC of his findings, as well as Baylor and TCU, which forwarded the information to the conference. That's an interesting detail, right? Like, somewhere Max Olson learned in this story, hey, someone figured out there might be issues with the helmet comms in the A&M Arkansas game, and they told Baylor and TCU. And now Kirby Hocutt's turning around and saying, hey, we just played Baylor and TCU. We'd like the league to look into this to make sure nothing happened here. That's the way I take it, right? You're starting to connect some of those dots. There is a whole section here. I mean, it talks about the other conferences are not as worried about this, and that the SEC, Big 12, Big 10, and ACC have worked together with GSC in the last 4 weeks to investigate potential concerns and to move to a more encrypted and secure platform. So, like, some of this seems weird. The report says they've been working on this for 4 weeks, but now yet that Kirby Hocutt is making this a real thing, they're going to be able to get it changed out within like 5 days to get the helmet comms back. Like, why did this not happen sooner? That seems interesting, like dragging their feet on this a bit. There was a section about the other conferences not being as concerned, so I don't know. Apparently others are not nearly as worried about this. There is also a part here in the article about how many people believe there's not really a competitive advantage to be gained because even if an opponent tuned into that frequency were hearing what was happening, they would also need to know how to decode the play calls and effectively communicate adjustments to their own team before the snap, a much more challenging task than sideline signal stealing. Quote, "There's no real advantage," one Big 12 chief of staff argued. One, you're speaking a different language. Two, if you think you'd be able to enact in real time what they say and try to do it on the field, you're delusional. You're just being your stereotypical paranoid football coach. You can't relay it to the kids fast enough. I mean, look, a Big 12 chief of staff would know far more than I would. I do not think that I am informed enough to really, truly know what the competitive advantage would be there, how valuable that information would actually be. I am left to just kind of trust that. But what I do know is that it seemed like all the leagues were aware of this for a month. They were all gradually working toward it, but didn't think that it was that big of a deal. Now, all of a sudden, Texas Tech thinks that it's a pretty big deal. Again, if everything in this report is accurate, Texas Tech thinks it's a pretty big deal. Now it's turning into a bigger something. And this happens right in the aftermath of Texas Tech losing back-to-back games after they were unbeaten in Big 12 play and blowing a huge lead in one and getting embarrassed at home in the other where the team put up 50 plus points on you. It's not the greatest look. I mean, I'm not going to come down super hard without, I guess, specifically knowing all of the details here, but it feels like that quote at the end feels a little bit just like overly paranoid football coach. This feels a little bit like overly paranoid football coach to me. It does. Got to be honest. I like Joey McGuire a lot. One of my favorite guys to talk to at Big 12 Media Days. Not sure that I'm in love with this, especially considering the timing and that you just lost those 2 games. It's not going to be a great look publicly. I'm not sure that there's any way really around that. And look, I understand, like last year, I mean, the same thing, more or less, according to the reports we saw around the K-State Iowa State game in Ames last year, same type of thing happened with K-State basketball. And, you know, I ride big time for Jerome Tang. At the end of the day, I think most people looked at it the same way that I'm kind of perceiving this to be viewed on Texas Tech. Like, you know, you lost the game, sour grapes. That's what most people are going to think about this. I'll be interested to see if anything comes of it. I highly doubt that anything will. But, you know, I don't know. AMAC says, how could you be paranoid? How could you not be paranoid, rather, about after Michigan sign-stealing guy won them the national championship? Well, I don't think Connor Stallions won Michigan a national championship. I don't get super worked up over the Stallion story either way. I think teams have been doing stuff like that and try to do stuff like that forever. I don't know. I just don't get super worked up about that. And I think coaches have always been paranoid before and or after this. I don't even think it really has that much to do with Stallions. I think this would have happened the same way in 2018, 2019, if this were introduced and someone discovered the same thing. So just my opinion, just my 2 cents there. Anyway, I know I've got a couple of super chats here. This is definitely Hail Mary time. If you got something to get in, I'm going to have to bounce here because I am losing the voice fast, but thank you for bearing with me tonight. Rise and Shout. Why do you think most Pac-12 teams struggled in the Big 10, ACC, Big 12? All right, well, let's think about that. I mean, Washington, I think some of it's a case by case, right? Like Washington lost like that entire roster. Washington is they're not an Ohio State type of program. They're not on that level where you can just literally reload every year. They still have to build toward that. You kind of have to go through a building cycle and crescendo and have that team and hit your small window. And they did it. They did it big time last year, but they lost a lot. So they were always going to have to recover. And then they have a new coach and go to a new conference. Like, I think that it makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't hold that against them a ton. Oregon is the number 1 team in the country right now. So it's clearly working out pretty well for them. Utah. Now, I think this year has uncovered foundational cracks in Utah's whole program more so than what anybody would have thought. But in fairness, I mean, they did lose Cam Rising. Like, they banked on having Cam Rising around this season. If they would have known this would have happened, they could have gone and gotten a more experienced portal quarterback, and it probably makes them look a hell of a lot better. I would say I think losing one quarterback should not crater your program the way that it has this year, and that's probably indicative of some bigger issues going on. Maybe not anything crazy, but at least more issues than what people thought this year. But you can explain away at least, well, I mean, Cam Rising, that situation is sort of torpedoed another season for them. Who else? How do we want to go down the line here? I mean, Arizona State's actually having a really good year. Arizona's having a bad year. I think, frankly, right now, it just looks like they didn't make a very good hire. So I think there are explanations for a lot of these. Arizona State and Oregon have been good. Washington, Arizona have been bad. Colorado has been pretty good. There's another one that's been pretty good. Boy, who am I missing here? Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah. I got those. And then Oregon, Washington. I mean, it seems like some of these have individual circumstances that can be explained away. I don't think it's really like, if the point is like, is there like a big Pac-12 wide problem here? I wouldn't really subscribe to that theory. I think it's been enough. There are just different circumstances with all of these different teams enough. And so, you know what? Some of it probably is. There's probably a little bit of, and this may be some for Utah too, just change of scenery, new teams that you don't know inside and out, that could have an effect too. I mean, I think genuinely that could be a part of it too, that is just something that you have to account for. But I don't think it's something super unique to the Pac-12 or anything like that necessarily. Our web, old Southwest Conference schools and cheating. The memories. Boy, that is true. I was working on, I have a video that will come out at some point. I was writing a script for it recently. And it involves Arkansas. And so I was doing this reading, some research on Arkansas back in the day, and it was talking about this run that they had in like the 60s and 70s. And it pointed out as a point of pride, like, hey, Arkansas was one of only two schools, and I think Rice was the other, one of only two schools in the Southwest Conference that did not get NCAA violations in X number of years or whatever, like holding that up like, hey, you were one of two schools in the league that didn't have NCAA violations in this time span. I was like, man, hell yeah, Southwest Conference. Hell yeah. AlphaCat says, if you send a scout to the opponent's previous game and listen in, it would help for the game. But I think the point they're making here is like, it's so fast for one, and a sign, there's like more film out there. So you could be like watching the signs throughout the game. The language is going to be a lot harder to decipher and figure out how you're going to decode that. Like decoding signs when you see them in advance, and you can like, Stallions is like filming this stuff and he can see an entire game and start to map out and put that together. You don't have the lead time with the helmet communications. You would just be hearing it and then having to decode the language there. I guess if one team is getting the helmet communications from the game before against Texas Tech and then handing that off, like if Baylor gets it the game before and then hands it off to TCU and says, here, this is what we heard, this is what this means. Like, but I think the point is that's probably not happening. And they're saying if you just intercepted on game day, you wouldn't have any idea what the language on the play call necessarily means. Maybe if you hear it in the first quarter and then it comes back to help you in the fourth, I'm sure there's something, but I think what they're saying is like, it would be really tough. It'd be really tough to gain too much of an advantage from it. So, hey, if we've got a Big 12, if we've got a Big 12 cheating scandal on our hands, it's going to dominate the headlines for a while. It'll just make things more interesting. From a content standpoint, I can't really complain. So I guess I do need to thank Texas Tech for that. So I will do that. I will do that. Okay. Well, all right. We've got the cheating hardliners here. Look, I don't care too strongly either way on this. I think most people will view this as sour grapes. You can agree or disagree, but I think most people would view this as sour grapes. Right or wrong? I think that's what's here. And we also, okay. Rise and shout. Let me be fair here. The Cal schools. I forgot about Calford. Well, Cal, I don't know. Cal, I think, what is Cal up to now? For a while there, Cal was having its best football season I can remember in a while. But it does seem like they've fallen off. Yeah, they're now 4-4. They lost 4 of 5. Goodness gracious, they crushed Oregon State. And Stanford is just bad and has been bad. So, like, those are two teams that have been bad, and I'd argue Cal is maybe debatably a little bit better this year than they have been. You take their last 10 years. So, again, UCLA has sucked. USC is having a bad year for sure. USC, if you want to say USC is the team that out of all of that has had the worst transition to their new league, and that a lot of that is because of the Big Ten and the travel, that I can get behind. USC, I think, because they've had Maryland, they've had Minnesota, they've had Michigan, they've had a lot of these games where they're traveling across multiple time zones and losing. That could definitely be a part of it. But Lincoln Riley did not exactly show that he was running like a program full of tough guys that were going to be able. I'm not trying to question anyone's
manhood or anything here, but that was not. They're kind of soft. Like that's a sort of a soft, cushy program. It's not one that I would have anticipated could make it through something like that unscathed. So, yeah, I get what your point is there. I just still would say I think there's a lot of individual circumstances there as opposed, and there have been examples of multiple teams there that are having better years than they typically would. That's what I'm saying. You send a scout and listen to the calls. Yeah, okay. I mean, I guess if that's the allegation that has been done in advance, look, maybe so, man. Maybe so. If Texas Tech's onto this and they can prove it that TCU and Baylor really did something here, then okay. Hey, fine. I have my doubts, but if they can prove it, I will stand here and say, hey, good catch. That's not great. Sonny Dykes, Dave Aranda, not awesome. But as it stands, I lean more to the sour grape side right now until proven otherwise. And I would guess, again, that is going to be most of the general reaction. I haven't really checked Texas Tech Twitter, like, what's going on with TCU Twitter, Baylor Twitter to see how people are reacting to this. All right, we'll get Alan's question in here, and then I am going to get out of here and try and rest this voice. Alan, appreciate you, Alan. Thank you for being here. Alan says, John, think we will have 2 schools in the college football playoff. Which 2? Looking forward to Jayhawk basketball. Yeah, hey, I did not really see any KU basketball. I saw they played last night. I was busy watching K-State play last night. Little lethargic, team that's going to need to develop some chemistry, but they look more athletic than last year. Will we have 2 teams in the playoff? I think there's a decent chance. I would still say most likely scenario for that to happen right now, because I do feel like Iowa State should be the favorite in Farmageddon. I think the best scenario there would be BYU and Iowa State meet as unbeatens in the Big 12 championship game, and they both go. So I guess I would say if it is going to happen, most likely to get in, I'm still going Iowa State 1, BYU 2, K-State 3, I think would be my order there for those. But hey, I appreciate you, Alan. Thank you, my friend. Couple more things here real quick. Trizzy Jake, I guess K-State should be happy they don't play Baylor and TCU. I would trade you at BYU and at Iowa State for at Baylor and at TCU right now. K-State is the only team in the league this year that has to go to Baylor, to Colorado, and to Iowa State. So 3 of the top 4 teams in the league. I would trade that right now. You can listen to Avery and Matt Wells all you want. I will make that trade. No offense, Baylor and TCU, but I would make that trade. I would. Okay, guys, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to my voice being a little bit off tonight. Appreciate all of you. Make sure if you're a Big 12 fan, you want to support the channel. You want all the latest on all this. You want my Big 12 power rankings tomorrow. You want all the Big 12 news filtered down to how it affects the Big 12. College football news filtered down to how it affects the Big 12, not the Big 10 or the SEC. Go to ofbnews.com to subscribe to my Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. That's ofbnews.com. Join 2,600 plus other Big 12 fans who are already reading Open for Business. Totally free to your inbox multiple times per week. Like the video. Drizzy Jake, I know you were cheating. I was just making a sour grapes point myself. We've all got some sour grapes. I've got some there. I will not have sour grapes if you like the video. I will not have sour grapes if you make sure that you're subscribed. If you're watching this, please make sure that you are subscribed. And I will not have sour grapes if you tell all your friends about this show and about Open for Business at ofbnews.com, or click the link in the description of this video. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care, and I will talk to you soon.